Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Lefton, and I'm the Chief Development Officer of UJA, and I'm really pleased to welcome you here tonight for a very important conversation. Over the past month, our community has seen an incredibly disturbing, well-documented, and dangerous rise in anti-Semitism, fueled by growing anti-Israel hate in the wake of the latest conflict between Israel and Hamas. This isn't the first time that we've seen anti-Semites exploit the Middle East tensions to spread hate in our city. But the speed and the vicious nature of this current escalation in hate is unlike anything that we've seen before in our community. And I mean that in virtually every area in which we're seeing this threat emerge. I'm not sure about you, but it's really one of the only things that people can speak about everywhere I go. Not that we're going so many places these days, but everyone I speak to. And it really is quite scary. The level of online hate and bullying that our young people are exposed to on a constant basis. And we can only imagine just how much more difficult things be when students return to campus in the fall. We're also seeing the sickening comments of so-called human rights activists who have been using their platforms online to spread lies about Israel, including the heinous accusations of apartheid and genocide. We're seeing targeting of Jewish businesses, be it anti-Semitic vandalism or online campaigns to destroy the livelihoods of business owners. And we're seeing a five-fold increase in the number of anti-Semitic incidents happening in our neighborhoods, including the shameful intimidation of visibly Jewish community members by anti-Jewish activists, anti-Israel activists driving along the Bathurst corridor in the middle of our city. We're in a new territory. And when you look at the full landscape, community security, online, social media, politics, campus, interfaith outreach, Holocaust education, Israel advocacy, there's not one area that we can afford to ignore. UJA has a multifaceted strategy to countering anti-Semitism. We invest in campus through our partners at Hillel. We're working to equip students with the materials that they need and the messaging that they need to go and speak out, whether it's working with administrations or other campus leaders, non-Jewish campus leaders, working with student government. We've been very, very involved. We invest in community security. I think many of you know this is an area that we're trying to scale up. We were trying to scale this up before this most recent wave of anti-Semitism, but it's an area where we know a lot of work needs to be done. UJ has an entire department that focuses on community security, working to make sure that people at our schools, shuls, community centers, camps, that they are trained and they know how to deal with the security incident should it arise. We'll talk more about that a little later to make sure that you have the information you need to call community security if you need to. We invest in Holocaust education, and we have thousands, tens of thousands of students in a normal pre-pandemic year coming in to learn about the Jewish community and the atrocities of the Holocaust. And we connect it to modern day anti-Semitism, so people actually understand that anti-Semitism is still alive and well, and now more than ever we can see it in our community. And last, we invest in volunteer mobilization. And this year, we're going to be focused on engaging volunteers in significant efforts to combat anti-Semitism, whether it's rallying people, and you'll hear more about this later, to write letters to their members of parliament, their elected officials, or influencers in the media, whether it's preparing people with the materials that they need and the messaging they need to speak to their non-Jewish friends, their colleagues, their employers. We want to make sure that we're able to help our community combat anti-Semitism. Most important, and certainly last but not least, we invest in advocacy through our advocacy agent, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CJA, as most of you know it. CJA's team works tirelessly and strategically to build relationships with leaders and key parts of Canadian society, whether it's government, media, or civil society, to ensure that our voice as a community is heard by decision makers. CJA's team not only does an outstanding job of representing UJA in our community, they've developed tools and resources to empower community members to make an impact through advocacy. By making an impact, first and foremost, requires being equipped and comfortable in navigating really challenging conversations with our friends and our neighbors and our colleagues of all backgrounds, most of whom don't have the same level of knowledge or passion that the people on this call have. And while many of those conversations might be uncomfortable, they've never been more necessary, because we must have allies beyond our community who will understand what we're going through and not just empathize, but stand with us and will help us push back. Tonight, my colleague Noah Shack, Vice President of CJA, is going to be speaking with us. Noah oversees all of CJA's work in Toronto and the GTA, as well as its advocacy work at Queen's Park, and really is one of the smartest people I've met when it comes to effective advocacy. So I'm really hoping that tonight is going to be a valuable session for all of us. We are going to have time to ask questions. Please note at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. The chat has been disabled, but you can ask questions in the Q&A throughout Noah's remarks. Noah's going to focus on at the beginning, really, how do we respond to anti-Semitism? How do we have basic conversations with our colleagues and our peers and our friends about what's going on? And then we're going to have time to address any questions that you either submitted in advance of this call or that you type in the Q&A throughout Noah's remarks. So with that, I want to thank Noah for taking the time to join us tonight. We know you've been working day and night around the clock, especially the last few weeks. I'm really happy that you've been able to join us to share your insights. And with that, over to you, Noah. And thank you everyone else for joining us as well.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm always blown away listening to you articulate how UJA can bring together such a comprehensive array of programming and tools and resources to support our community whenever it's in need, and no matter what the issue is. And unfortunately, I'm here tonight speaking at a time of great uncertainty. People are feeling scared, alone, and uncertain about our future. We're seeing a loathsome cycle in Jewish history show signs of repeating itself. What is Jewish life going to look like in Toronto in the future? Are we going to end up like the Jews of France? Perhaps most troubling of all, we're feeling alone. We're seeing many of our friends and neighbors stay silent or even shamefully joining in the fray. A spike in anti-Semitism related to hostilities in Israel is not something new, but this time is different. The quality and the quantity is more intense. From anti-Israel protesters driving up to Jewish family homes to shout obscenities and slurs at children, to businesses, charities, and other institutions and individuals being boycotted or shunned because of their Jewish identity. Threats of rape and murder, vandalism, graffiti, harassment, intimidation, vicious hate on social media. What's more, often those perpetuating or minimizing this alarming spike in anti-Semitism are all too often those in a position of judgment over matters of hate and discrimination, in workplaces, in schools. This isn't a temporary spike like other times. We're now engaged in a long-term fight to push back against it, and we should not have to do so alone. That's why CEJA is calling for the Prime Minister of Canada to convene an emergency summit to combat anti-Semitism, bringing together all three levels of government, the provinces and the cities, and the federal government, to share resources and best practices to push back against the hate taking root in our society. We need a big picture strategy backstopped by the government to deal a definitive blow to anti-Semitism in Canada. We need action to educate Canadians about anti-Semitism and the dangers it poses not only for Jews, but for the very fabric of our society. We need action to address the abuse of online platforms that spread hate. We need action to ensure communities like ours have the resources necessary to look after our security, like communities in the United Kingdom and Australia. And we need your help. If you have not already done so, please visit fightit.ca, where with just a few clicks, you can send an email to our elected officials encouraging them to act. We need this help urgently. We need to send as many messages as we can to our elected officials to make sure they understand just how important this is and just what an intense challenge we're facing. But our community response doesn't begin or end with a few clicks. I'd like to speak with you for a few minutes tonight about some of the strategies we use at CEJA to achieve advocacy success that can help empower you as individuals and as communities to have an impact. We're all in this together. The good news, polling shows that anti-Semitism is not popular in Canada. The vast majority of Canadians reject it whenever they see it. The bad news, anti-Semitism is insidious. It's a constantly mutating virus. The danger comes when Canadians do not recognize it for what it is and fail to take a stand against it. When we're talking about responding to anti-Semitism, we're talking first and foremost about educating those who are confused or misled, and pointing out the hypocrisy and double standards that are often applied to Jews and Israel. I'd like to share with you 3 strategies that you should keep in mind as you navigate this challenging time that can help open doors to meaningful and constructive conversations that can propel us forward in the fight against Jew hatred. First, you don't need to be an expert on anti-Semitism. You don't need to be an expert on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. You don't need to know all the ins and the outs. No one here on this meeting tonight, including me, is an encyclopedia with all attainable knowledge. All you need to be is authentic. You need to tell your story. You need to tell what's true to you. We have been blessed here in Toronto with a string of excellent Israeli consuls general. And one of the previous ones quipped a one-liner that's really stuck with me in one of his speeches, and I'm gonna steal it now. Israel doesn't need lawyers. It needs character witnesses. What counts is authenticity. Share your story. Speak from the heart. No one can dispute that. Don't let a lack of full knowledge paralyze you. Psychological studies show that personal anecdotes are more persuasive than facts. Don't have an argument, share an experience. Number 2, while you're a member of the Jewish community, you are first and foremost a human being. And like all other human beings, you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The impact that someone's words have are of equal, if not greater importance than their intent in speaking. If someone says something that makes you uncomfortable, you have every right to tell them how it feels like anti-Semitism. Effective advocacy is speaking to people in a way that they will listen. They will not understand all the complexity in the Middle East or the history of anti-Semitism and the challenges that we have faced throughout history. But they will understand that their neighbor is feeling targeted, that their neighbor is feeling under threat, that their neighbor is feeling hate. And that is the impact of anti-Semitism and of the words that are being pointed against them. Number 3, the most important factor for whether someone is susceptible to anti-Semitism or developing an anti-Semitic attitude or view is their exposure to Jewish people. In our last round of public opinion research about attitudes towards Jews, and CJA does this regularly to take the temperature of what Canadians are thinking and feeling about our community and about Israel, so that we can have an understanding of where we're at and what will resonate with people in terms of our engagement. In one of the focus groups that we did, there were 10 people sitting around a table. These were 10 strangers. None of them knew each other. We didn't know them. They were representative of the street, society at large. At one point, they were asked a question about, what do you think about Jewish people here in Canada? And one of the participants said that Jews are a bunch of racists. They only care about themselves. They don't care about society. They're cheap. They think they're better than other people. The tropes went on and on and on. And the moderator asked the other people sitting around the table, what do you think? Is that something that you've heard? Is that something that resonates with you? And 8 of the remaining 9 nodded and said, yeah, you know what? I've heard that before. That's something that I've heard. It could be true. The one exception was a young woman who looked visibly shaken, stressed out, uncomfortable. And she decided to take a stand. She stood up and said, I have a problem with that. I have Jewish friends. I grew up with Jews. And none of what you're saying is true in my experience. I strongly disagree with this. And the result of that one person standing up was that those other 8 immediately disregarded the anti-Semite in the room. While we may not be able to convince that anti-Semite that they're wrong, we can convince those who don't necessarily recognize anti-Semitism when they see it. And one of the most powerful ways we can do that is by developing trusted, meaningful relationships, having positive experience and interactions with our non-Jewish neighbors. That is what makes such a difference. And I can tell you in my work as someone who engages with elected officials all the time, often what really motivates people, and these are people from all backgrounds, from all across the country, from all walks of life, what motivates the ones who are true champions for our community, and there are many, is some moment in their past where they had an interaction with a Jewish person or a friendship with a Jewish person that really resonated with them and developed a real authentic and deep affection and connection with an individual and by extension, our community. If I had to sum it up, I'd say that we are all ambassadors for the Jewish community. And one of the most effective ways that we can help push back against anti-Semitism is to have people with real lived experience of interacting with us share that the things they're saying about us are not true and that it's anti-Semitic. So if I had to distill it down to just 3 core principles, what I've been talking about. Number 1, be authentic. Share your genuine experience. It works. Number 2, speak about the impact others have on you. You don't have to prove anti-Semitism. Your experience is what matters. And number 3, relationships, not talking points, change minds. People listen to those they trust. Be a trusted person. And if you use these 3 strategies, it'll help to open the door to conversations that can really move us forward and turn the tide against the rising anti-Semitism that we're experiencing right now.